Hello, I am Zahirul Alam. Welcome you all on Frankly Speaking. Our today's guest is Mr. John M. Powell. He is Deputy Executive Director of Fundraising and Communications Department at the World Food Programme WFP. WFP is the United Nations Food Aid Agency and the largest humanitarian organization in the world. Mr. Powell is here in Bangladesh to help a world program called Walk the World, which is aiming at end of hunger, especially child hunger. Welcome, Mr. John M. Powell.
Thank
on
you
Frankly Speaking.
Thank you very much, Mr. Alam.
Mr. Powell, you know that the hunger is the oldest enemy of the humanity, and hunger and malnutrition is still #1 risk in the world, health risk. So how do you think that your visit will helpful in meeting this challenge?
The purpose of Walk the World is to focus on the issue of child hunger. We have 300 million children in our world who don't get enough to eat each day and every day. Yet hunger is a solvable problem. We know how to beat it. So the purpose of Walk the World is to have a global event bringing together all of those who are concerned about ending hunger, particularly children, so we can focus attention of the world and its media both on the problem and on its solutions.
You have observed the 21st May as the Walk the World program around the world, including Bangladesh. So how did you observe the program in Bangladesh, and what was in your mind in your program?
Well, we had the walk in 5 separate locations, including here in Dhaka. It was a walk which began at 10 o'clock and engaged all of us who are concerned about hunger issues. And I must say it was such a delight to be accompanied by so many Bangladeshis and so many other colleagues who are concerned about the problem and its solution.
So you did have a huge response on this?
Oh yes, Bangladesh is a key partner in our Walk the World event, which begins in New Zealand and follows the time zones across the world over a 24-hour period.
What is the background of the Walk the World program?
Well, the idea itself, the walk, is a mere 3 years old. It began, its origins were with a corporate partner, TNT. WFP has a unique partnership with this corporate global logistics firm. And the family, the friends, the workers at TNT were very keen to engage in fundraising events to support children, particularly providing a meal to children at school. One of the events that they staged was a Walk the Wall in China, and that sort of caught on, and that was the trigger for transforming Walk the World in China into a global event.
Oh, that's great. But it's basically a fundraising program or create awareness. What is the main focus?
It has both of those purposes, but the primary purpose, the dominant purpose, is to raise awareness of the issue of hunger, particularly amongst children.
So what do you think the hunger situation around the world, particularly taking into consideration the situation in the developing countries, is it the hunger situations declining, or is it at the same stage?
The sad truth is there are more hungry people in the world today than there were in 1990. There are 852 million of our fellow human beings who don't have enough to eat each day and every day. 300 million of those people are children, and more than 100 million of them, mostly girls, don't go to school. The challenge of hunger is extraordinary. We keep adding numbers to the rolls. The international community came together after the World Food Summit in Rome and said in 1996, let us cut hunger in half by 2015. In 2000, the Millennium Summit in New York, world leaders again gathered and made that commitment. Together, we need to bring that commitment to reality. We owe it to our children and to our children's future.
Is it possible by ending hunger by 2015?
The goal of the Millennium Summit is merely to halve hunger by 2015. We in the World Food Programme and our colleagues and associates in the UN family, the NGO community, cooperating governments, we believe that you can end child hunger by 2015. We know how to do it. There are programs, there are policies, there are strategies which can see us wipe the scourge of hunger from the face of our planet.
But there are a lot of commitments of the world leaders. Say you were telling that the ending or half to make it half by 2015, the hunger situation. But the resource mobilizations of the donor countries especially, it's not at the expected level.
Well, there are really two very interesting issues. The first is that donors to the World Food Programme, governments, the private sector and individuals, they have never been more generous. For example, last year we were voluntarily funded to the extent of $2.8 billion. Over the period 2004-2005, we raised $5 billion US. The problem was that our program of work, the needs of the people we needed to support, expanded from 4.7 billion to 6. So while we received the largest volume of resources in our history, we were only 5/6 or about 80% there. The other issue, which is perhaps not sufficiently widely understood, is the fact that most of our funding, most of our support, comes from emergency humanitarian operations. That accounts for almost 90% of what we do. It's what you read about in the Horn of Africa, in Sudan, in Afghanistan. The truth of the matter is that the international community has rallied splendidly, and relatively few deaths from hunger and hunger-related causes occur in those crisis situations. 1 in 10 of the 25,000 people who will die today from hunger and hunger-related causes will die in a humanitarian crisis such as Darfur. 9 out of 10 will die somewhere in the subcontinent, somewhere in Africa, out of sight of the television cameras, without a social safety net, without the resources to survive. They will, however, just as surely die. Every one of those is a preventable death.
But we see at Africa, the situation is very precarious, like Sudan, Ethiopia, and Somalia. They're suffering a lot, the people there.
It is quite extraordinary. The situation we face in Sudan is the toughest we face anywhere in the world. WFP is trying to provide support to 6.8 million people in Sudan, focused in the Darfurs, in the transitional areas, and in the south. We face an array of extremely difficult situations: insecurity, banditry, loss of agricultural land because of the conflict, extraordinary numbers of internally displaced people, and quite frankly, we're struggling to raise the resources to be able to provide the food to the people who need it. Sadly, a few days ago, we needed to reduce the rations for people living in Darfur. What a horrible thing to have to do.
So WFP's, would you share about the program of WFP in Bangladesh? What are the programs you are going to undertake in future?
The main focus of our programs in Bangladesh has 3 particular components, all of which focused on the most vulnerable, what in Bangladesh is so often called the ultra-poor. The 28 million beneficiaries, Bangladeshis, I apologize, in this country, who are the least well supported, the most deprived.
They're at ultra-poor level, 28 million
28
people?
million people in Bangladesh.
So
we focus on one program which is called Vulnerable Group Development. This focuses essentially on female-headed households. These women have little or no education. They are widowed, divorced, abandoned, multiple children, the lowest 2-3% of the socio-economic ladder. And the program, together with the government and the non-government organization community, provides a food ration, largely in fortified atta, which allows them to participate in a development package, vocational training, functional literacy, savings and credit. At the end of this 2-year program, they are then able to engage in more commercial credit and play a real role in the market economy. A second major program is school feeding, providing a pack of micronutrient fortified biscuits to children at school. This gives them a substantial quantity of their required caloric intake and about 3/4 of the micronutrient fortification that a growing child needs. We found in the areas where we're working that attendance rates at schools have increased from 67 to 90%, and that's a terrific investment in Bangladesh's future.
Our guest is Mr. John M. Powell. Mr. Powell, we're talking about the school feeding program. Do you have any plan to expand this program in Bangladesh?
We're very hopeful that in the coming years, 2007 to 2010, we'll be able to expand our school feeding program from its current 600,000 students to almost 1 million.
Oh, that's great. But especially the WFP is entirely depend on the generous contribution of the donor countries. So how much response you're getting from the major donor countries?
The international donor community, governments essentially, have never before been more generous to WFP. Almost all member states have increased their contributions 2004 to 2005, and as importantly, the number of member states that give has increased from 54 to 80, among them Bangladesh. So among the purposes for which I'm visiting Bangladesh is to say thank you to the government for its extraordinary support.
So why you have selected particularly this time to visit Bangladesh?
This time for Bangladesh for 3 main purposes. One is to participate in the array of events centered around Walk the World. The second is to have a series of consultations, a series of meetings with government leaders and with the international donor community to build support and understanding for our program in Bangladesh. And thirdly, it is to work through some of the fine-tuning of the country program for the subsequent period.
So are you happy with the discussions you have had already with the government?
I'm delighted to tell you that in the many occasions I have visited Bangladesh, the conversations with the government leaders have been consistently excellent, and their support for our work together has been unstinting. Similarly, the international donor community here in Dhaka has been very supportive of our work, led by donors such as Japan, the European community, and 14 or 15 other donors.
Your contributions, WFP's contributions globally, is it at expected level? Is it at significant contributions to the world?
Last year, WFP provided food assistance to 96 million people in more than 80 countries. Almost 80% of those people who received our assistance were women and children. Most of them were in Africa. By most standards, that's a pretty impressive performance.
But I'm asking these questions because 852 million people still hungry.
You are absolutely correct, and that's the second part. We have done well, the international community and the World Food Programme, but we need to do so much more.
You generate and raising a lot of funds. Do you think that the funds is equally distributed to the member countries? 96%
of the resources that we receive are directed by the donors to one operation and not to another. So WFP, the organization, actually has very little flexibility. Less than 5% of the total resources we get can we decide where they should go. Our basis for decision where these 5% of the resources should go is fundamentally around 2 or 3 points. The most important point is the population dependent almost entirely upon the support of the international community? And the example I would give you is refugees. WFP, in partnership with UNHCR, supports refugee populations around the world. We provide the food, UNHCR provides the protection and associated services. If we cannot fully fund refugee operations, refugees eat less. There is no opportunity in most cases for the refugees to work outside the camp. They have no other source of income. They have no capital. Without the food, they eat less. And that's a pretty tough place to be.
The fund being spent, the huge fund being spent for the alleviations of hunger around the world, do you think the spending process is transparent? The allocation process is transparent?
Yes, it is. WFP, for example, as I mentioned, has these two categories. One, where the donor decides where they wish their resources to be allocated. They take the decision, not WFP. That's 95% of the cases. 5% WFP decides. What we provide to every supporter, and in fact it's available to the world at large, is an annual report for every program that WFP has everywhere in the world. Our programs are audited both internally and externally, and we provide the information readily to all of the international community. You see, our ability to do our work is a function of trust and confidence between WFP, the host government, for example, Bangladesh, and the international donor community. So it is really so important for us to be transparent in everything that we do.
What was the amount last year you could raise fund for WFP?
$2.8 billion US was what we raised last year.
Oh, that is pretty huge amount. So in the coming years, how much you are expecting?
To fully meet the needs of our programs in 2006 and 2007, we will need more than $6.6 billion US. And that assumes no emergencies, no additional emergencies for the rest of 2006 and all of 2007. And as you know as well as I, that is a most unlikely prospect.
So you're still short of huge fund, I think, to meet the challenge especially in the situation in Africa.
Absolutely. And many of the crises we know, but there are some we simply do not. No one does. Who last year would have predicted the tsunami, the Pakistan earthquake, for example? Inshallah, this will not occur, but historically it is certain to occur.
Have you experienced any field visit in Bangladesh already?
Not on this occasion. The last occasion I had the wonderful opportunity to visit again Rangpur Kurigram district, which I enjoyed immensely. In fact, if I may digress for a short moment, WFP has a series of excellent partnerships with leading corporations around the world. One of those is the Boston Consulting Group. The best spokesman for WFP's work are the beneficiaries. We brought the leadership of the Boston Consulting Group. We took them to Rangpur Kurigram, let them speak to the children in school, speak to the women who are receiving the assistance, and they said, we want to be your partner. We want to help solve this problem.
You know that Bangladeshi food production has been increasing recent times. It was, I think, 18 million metric tons last year?
It was 18 million metric tons thereabouts in the early 90s, and is now more than 27 million. It's an extraordinary achievement.
So it can meet the challenge, growing challenge of food for the 140 million people. Is it enough?
The food production will continue to need to keep pace with population within some limits. Most countries in the world are not food self-sufficient, and it's a foolish idea to overly concentrate on food production. Countries need to produce efficiently that food which they can and trade for their additional requirements. A perfect example is Singapore. It produces very little food. It is very successful in trade and commerce and can afford to purchase food. So you need to look at both sides, both domestic production in economically efficient terms and the capacity to import, to ensure that not only human consumption but commercial requirements are also animal feed and so on can be met.
Oh, Mr. Powell, how many years you have been working with WFP?
I've had the pleasure and privilege of working with WFP since 1990, and if I may say, the first country that I visited when I assumed my role at World Food Programme was Bangladesh.
Oh, you also visited Bangladesh in 1990 also?
Absolutely, and that's why Bangladesh holds such a special place in my heart.
Oh, that's great. You're basically a national of Australia.
I am.
So how is your life in Australia? Your family members stay with you?
I'm accompanied in Rome by my wife. Our 3 children are now grown up and have returned to Australia, where they're living in Brisbane. And another very nice association between Australia and Bangladesh, which have long had excellent friendship and partnership, is the wonderful partnership we're now having in cricket.
Oh, I see. That's great. Okay, thank you very much, Mr. John M. Powell on Frankly Speaking.
Thank you very much,
us.
Mr. Alam.
Yeah, thank you. Dear viewers, the World Food Programme is the United Nations frontline in the global fight against hunger. With the help of its partners, WFP fed over 100 million people over more than 85 countries in recent years. But hunger is still colossal, is painful. If we look at the countries like Sudan and Ethiopia, it's good that WFP is working relentless to alleviate this problem. Dear viewers, we thank you indeed and take care. Bye-bye.